slide. And this is the burn pits. This slide is actually of an Iraq burn pit. And as you can see, it's an open field fire where material is dumped into a pit and then set on fire with jet fuel. That's apparently the common method of igniting a burn pit. Next slide. So there's been a lot of concern about what people who were near burn pits were exposed to. There's been exposure estimates looking at where the burn pits occurred, and the substances that were burned included water bottles, medical waste, even unexploded munitions, body parts. All of that were burned in these burn pits. And so the exposures from that included benzene, other toxic chemicals, and particulate matter, air pollutants, either fine particulates or the soot, the black smoke that you saw on the previous slide. So there is no presumptive standard at this point for people who are exposed to burn pits for specific diseases that they might be compensated for, but it's in process. I think that whole process is still underway, and we will probably hear more about it in the coming months or years. And I would now say that some of these exposures were similar to what happened at the September 11th, 2001, buildings that were collapsed in lower Manhattan. And the exposures there were primarily to firefighters, police, and rescue workers, first responders, basically. Next slide. So the families of people exposed to the burn pits have established their own website. This is similar to the Marines website for Camp Lejeune exposures. Families that established the burnpits360.org site collected information about a whole long list of diseases, and to the extent that they knew what they were exposed to and when, information such as that was collected in a voluntary, self-reported way. And then in 2013, President Obama signed the Open Burn Pits Registry Act. Again, this was a congressional act which was signed into law such that the Department of Veterans Affairs, now has set up a voluntary airborne hazards and open burn pit registry. And again, this is to collect information of volunteers who go online and give their information to the VA that can become the basis for deciding what further studies can and need to be done. The next slide, please. Several studies have been done by researchers in New York City of first responders, and they have documented in the initial stages anyway, higher rates of respiratory illness in respiratory veterans. And the symptoms include wheezing, cough, chest pain and tightness, and allergy symptoms. And then there are additional studies underway currently by researchers in the New York, New Jersey area. And then the World Trade Center responders have also had diminished lung function in some early studies of the first responders. The exposed, yeah, all right. Next slide, please. That's just a picture of people working on the pile, as it was called, and then the smoke arising from it in the background. Next slide. So the James Zadroga Act was, the 9/11 Health and Compensation Act was passed in 2010. I'm sure you've seen references to that in the news. A comedian named Jon Stewart got very involved and advocating for that, and actually advocating for an update of that. And that James Zadroga was himself a first responder who had died, and so it was named after him. This also provides health monitoring and financial aid to first responders. This is not specific to veterans. This is to people who worked on the response to the 9/11 disaster in Manhattan. And so the health monitoring and financial aid includes bladder cancer, lung cancer, and a long list of other diseases. And that's already beginning, and it's going to continue the period of eligibility because of this update that was passed more recently. The eligibility for those exposed to in 2001 will continue to 2090 if people live that long. So I offer that as an example, not so much of a military exposure, but I'm sure some of the people who were first responders were military veterans and are military veterans that are suffering some of these conditions. But it was set up specifically for the first responders of any type. And so it has some similarities to the burn pit exposed veterans, although in a different context.